tell us an emotionally challenging situation that kind of spurred you to start this journey and um, just hop right in with that.
Okay. Yeah. Hi everyone. So my research and actually a book which just launched this week. This is a very exciting week for me. But are on the topics of leadership and gender, as Jared mentioned, but also emotional intelligence. So it's appropriate that I'm speaking with Jared today on that Hack Your EQ podcast because emotional intelligence is part of my research. So I'm happy to. I'm sure we'll get to that today as well. So first question was share an emotionally challenging time that I wish I'd handled a little better. I'll share a time when my background, I'm actually an entrepreneur now. I have a speaking and a consulting business. But I had 22 years in the pharmaceutical industry. And in one of my pharma companies I was at, I had a boss. So I loved my job. I was doing great in the company. And then I got this boss and we just locked heads and just did not get along. And I remember we had a meeting and she was new to the team. And I'd been in my role for, I don't know, 6 months or so. So I was pretty confident in my role and in my knowledge and technically confident. And so we were in this meeting with a bunch of other people and she said something that was factually wrong. And I corrected her in public and because to me, she was wrong, right? And it was misinformation. And so I corrected her in public, but then so we already had butted heads.
Oh gosh.
But then I realized that after that incident, our relationship actually, deteriorated and we just started, being at odds. And I went from loving my job to hating my job. But in hindsight, I realized that, and she happened to be Asian, and that actually is an important part of the story because in the Asian culture, the concept of saving face is really important. And at the time, I didn't know that. And so by correcting her in public at a meeting, I actually embarrassed her because I violated the saving face principle. And so that was a challenging time. And in hindsight, I wish I hadn't done that. I probably, would have said something afterwards. I would have said, hey, actually it's not that, it's this. Yeah. And corrected her. But so that's one example of something I should have handled a little differently. And that actually, from an emotional intelligence perspective, was basically just my social awareness. So I should have been a little more socially aware of not only the situation, but also how her culture played into it.
Yeah, that's a really high level of social awareness, being able to incorporate cultural differences. And I have heard similar things where Caucasian cultures are more prone to explicit, I'll say conflict, but just, hey, you're wrong. More blunt, I'll say, and the Eastern cultures are a little bit more on the saving grace side of things. I'm just curious too, to really help the audience kind of relive your moment when you corrected your boss. But did she use kind of how did she handle it? I'm imagining if Asian cultures have a less combative style of saying when they're upset, that she might have avoided you and you just felt tension, this unspoken tension, or was it more like, hey, yo, what the hell were you doing? Or something like that. Like,
yeah. Well, she didn't confront me directly, which is actually another part of social awareness. As part of the Asian culture, actually, it is less. There's actually a term for it that is escaping me at the moment. But they actually are. If you've ever done any cultural work and studied different countries and cultures, Hofstede, Gerd Hofstede is a psychologist who studied these different classifications or characteristics of cultures. One of them is conflict avoidance. And so Asian cultures actually are very high on conflict avoidance, meaning they don't address things one-on-one. They actually won't say anything. They'll either say it in private or won't say anything at all. And that's what happened in this situation. Is she never even mentioned to me. It actually took me months, actually probably months, to really figure out that was the crux.
Oh.
That's what started. That's it, what kind of escalated the situation. And when I started learning about the how important saving face is in Asian culture, I realized that incident turned her perspectives, and that's what really affected.
Kind of some unspoken tension, just like something in your gut was wrong, or like, yeah, and then you started not liking work. Okay, I understand. Yeah. So what's another time where so that was a situation of emotional intelligence that, you maybe could have handled better and you learned some lessons.
Yeah.
A time, and it really demonstrated the power of social awareness too. So that's super cool, by the way, to weave that in there. Do you have another story you're able to share that is about an emotionally challenging time that you handle with grace, poise, and so forth?
Yeah, actually, I'll share an example, not with other people, but with myself, but it was emotionally challenging. So in my bachelor's degree, I got my bachelor's at University of California, Irvine. And so I came in as a freshman, and my major was pre-med, because I always wanted to be a doctor. And I thought medical doctors was the road I was going to take. It ended up being different. I'm a doctor, but a different type of doctor. But so my childhood dream was to be a physician. And so I entered UCI, and I was pre-med major biology. And the first 2 years, let me backtrack a step. High school was actually pretty easy for me, and so I didn't develop the good study habits that I should have. And so when I got to college, I didn't apply myself enough, and so my grades started tanking. And I actually got put on academic probation for a couple of years. And I remember at the end of my sophomore year, I got called into the counselor's office. And my academic counselor said, you've been on probation for, however many semesters now. He says, your grades haven't come up. He goes, I'm going to strongly suggest that you take time off from the university.
Oh.
Well, in code, that meant I was getting kicked out of UCI.
Oh, this was not voluntary?
No.
Oh,
no.
Okay. No. Strongly suggest.
I strongly suggest, yeah. So it was not voluntary, yeah. So he strongly suggests I take time off. So basically, I remember going to so UCI has this big park in the center of the campus called Aldridge Park. And I remember going there and sitting on a bench and just bawling, just crying, thinking, I just got kicked out of UCI.
Oh.
So so it was emotionally challenging.
Yeah.
I was stressed out. And it was a really taxing time in my life. But what that actually was a turning point for me. And that's why I wanted to share the story with you is, it was a major turning point in my life because I did take 2 years off. So I left UCI. I took 2 years, and in that time, I did a few things. I joined a band. I'm actually a drummer, so I joined a band, and I got my EMT, emergency medical technician license, and started working at hospitals in emergency rooms. And the third thing I did is I switched my major to psychology, and started taking classes at junior colleges to get my GPA up. And those three things in that 2-year period helped me really find who I was and helped me build strength and confidence. And I refocused. And it was that situation of getting kicked out was enough to make me get motivated again and refocus and really get serious about school. So 2 years later, I went back to UCI, got back in as a psychology major this time. My grades were just fine, A's and B's, and I graduated with psychology major, and I was much, much happier. So that is an example of self-management. It's a self-management story for you from an emotional intelligence perspective. Is I had I had to pick myself up from the ground, and I had to refocus, and I had to remotivate myself. And I ended up overcoming the challenge. But that was a huge lesson for me, turning point, and it was all around my self-management.
Yeah, and before we kind of dive into more of your book and so forth, something that comes to mind really powerfully for me is I didn't go to college graduation because I didn't like my subject. I graduated, but I didn't like it. And I ultimately switched from economics to psychology. And in between that time period, I lived in this monastery and I got into meditation and yoga, and I had some life experience under my belt that gave me some ground to stand on to say, hey, I want to do this. I want to do I did psychology too. Right. It's awesome. I love it. But like, if someone is listening right now and they're in college or they're about to go to college and they don't know what they want to do, would you suggest they take a year off and get life experience, or take the traditional route?
Well, it's different for every person, but I am I'm a big proponent of junior colleges. And the reason for that is because, when you're 18, 19, oftentimes, we're not mature enough. We're not ready to really settle in and get serious about the books. And half the time we don't even know what we want to do. And so that's a really, it's a time where of significant growth for all of us. And so I think going to a junior college for a couple of years, either before going to a 4-year, is a great idea, because it helps you get grounded. It helps you get life experiences. It also helps you mature. It gives you time to mature a little bit and figure out what you want and what you want to focus on. And then I think, and then go into your 4-year, and you'll be a much better student because you're much more focused and you've had some experience under your belt. So I'm a huge fan of it. I did the other route and actually ended up doing that. I was forced into doing the D thing, but I'm so glad in hindsight, because those classes I took in junior, and I took classes at 3 different junior colleges here in Southern California, and I learned so much, and I loved the classes, and I was so I enjoyed the classes much better when I went back to UCI, because I had that experience at the JCs, and so I was a better student. I enjoyed it more, and I wanted to learn.
I hear you. What did any of those classes lead to the future topics you would be discussing? And were they some of your favorite classes? I don't know, like a women's studies class or social sciences, or?
Yeah. Actually, if I look back, everything I do now is psychology related, actually. And actually, my favorite part of the work I do is social sciences. It's social psychology. It's human dynamics. And so I study gender and how it pertains to gender. I look at emotional intelligence and leadership, and it's all about human behavior.
And perception too. Okay, so we're in the dynamic. We're talking about dynamics in a nutshell. You mentioned dynamics. What do you mean by that?
You mean gender dynamics?
Yeah. Well, your book is called The Power of Perception.
Yes.
And perception is a dynamic, so to speak, in a social environment where maybe someone is more technically skilled, but if they don't appear more technically skilled, that, I don't know, whatever, just dynamics. Let's just talk about the power of perception. What do you mean by that, generally speaking?
Yeah, no, that's actually a great question, because so I got the psychology degree, and I loved every class I had in psychology, from social psychology to group psychology to even abnormal psychology. I thought it was all interesting.
Yeah.
And so when I got to my doctorate, I knew when I started my program in 2010 that I wanted to do my dissertation research on leadership and gender, because I was interested in how those two related. But also at the time, this is when statistics around the leadership gender gap and women in the workforce and all those stats started becoming public. So it was about 10 years ago. And so I saw the statistics and I was shocked, like many people are. And so I wondered what was behind that. And so I knew I wanted to study, women in leadership, but then I've also always been fascinated by emotional intelligence and how it's a key driver in our success, not only in work, but our general success in life. And it's also a key driver of leadership. So I was really interested in looking at how emotional intelligence played into the perception of women as leaders.
Interesting. What were mentioned seeing these statistics that started coming out around 10 years ago, and you were shocked. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I'll give you some of the statistics. So women today are a little over more than half of the labor force. So that includes all occupations. So women make up over half of the labor force in the U.S. If you look at the percentage of people getting professional degrees, such as physician and attorney, more of those are women. So women hold 52% of all professional degrees. And then if you look at education, women in the US and in Europe actually are obtaining 60% of bachelor's degrees. So undergraduate degrees are 60% female, 40% male. And it's been like that statistic has held true for a few years now. And so when you look at those, you would think, okay, well, women are clearly represented in the workforce. They're getting experience they have as professionals, and they have the education. Great, right? So you would expect to see parity when you look at leadership, and that's not the case at all. And the biggest number that is really the barometer that people watch is the percentage of female CEOs at S&P 500 companies. And if you look at the number of women, given all the other statistics, 50 and 60%, it trickles down to 5%. So only 5% of women lead our largest corporations. So that translates to 26 female CEOs. And from that, for 26, that sounds like, okay, well, that's not a bad number. But then if you do the math, 5% of 500 is 26, but that also means there are 474 male CEOs. So when you look at it from that perspective, women aren't doing so well. And women have a long way to go. And I was really interested about those are the numbers. And I was really shocked that here we are, even today, we're 2018 today, and you have large numbers of women getting the experience and they have the education and they're in the workforce, but they're not making it to those leadership levels. And I was really interested in finding out why.
Yeah, so it's basically like 60%. Yeah, there's this huge gap. That's like, this huge gap that is like, you're curious about it, you're maybe frustrated a little bit or whatever, you got stuff going through your head, you decide to pursue this more, kind of looking at it at an emotional intelligence perspective. So what do you, in a nutshell, why do men kind of why do men get the leadership positions?
A number of reasons.
I know your book is unique because it approaches that question from different angles.
Yeah, and actually, that was my question too, Jared. Is why? Where are the women? Why? I don't understand why we're not even anywhere close to gender balance.
Okay. Here's the question. We'll make this an interesting question. What are the top 3 reasons? From 1, 2, and 3 in order. I know that's a tough question, but if you had to say the top 3 reasons.
Okay. Yeah. So let me just couch this by saying, so the way I structured my research and also the way I structured the book, The Power of Perception, is that I have the middle section. I have several chapters, and each chapter is dedicated to a different category of barriers. So there's 5, really 6 if you count emotional intelligence, but there's these categories of barriers, and within each category there's 3 or 4 different unique obstacles or barriers within these general categories. So I write about that in the book, and I talk about what are all the barriers that keep women from reaching those upper levels of leadership. But if I had to really boil it down to three, I would say the first one is gender bias and gender stereotypes. That is, it's biases are held throughout society, and they're passed down from generation to generation, but they're also reinforced in the media. And so, and we're all biased, first of all. We all hold biases, all of us, based on our background, our upbringing, our religion, our values. So we all hold personal biases, but the issue with biases is that, okay, so everyone has them. How can we address them if we even know about them? So I think the big issue is being aware of your biases, and many of us aren't aware of biases, or we're not truthful with ourselves about biases we may have. So I think.
Yeah, I hear you. Definitely. Biases are incredibly important, and gender biases are, I could definitely understand that being played out in the media, especially all that. I mean, women have so much pressure on them to look a certain way. That's what comes to mind for me. And I as a trainer and working with women who are trying to lose weight, a lot of women put just absurd pressure to look a certain way. And I know that's reflected in the media. Before we go into kind of the actionable strategies to overcome some of these barriers, real quick, wanted to get the other two, just general categories. And then
Sure.
I imagine that there might be some, let's play devil's advocate, right? There's someone in the audience saying, that's great. Women need to have more equality, yada, yada, yada. But I mean, it's this way for a reason, like blah, 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 and so, blah, blah. And maybe there's kind of even financial incentive. Like maybe that devil's advocate is thinking, you know what, it's just better this way when men are up at the top of the leadership positions. And I'm wondering if there's any sort of hard data that says when there's more diversity or equality or whatever, that, basically the bottom line goes up. So let's go through the other two reasons, and then we can dive into the other stuff. So what are the other two, with the top three? So number one was bias. Number two was.
Yeah, so I would say the biggest barrier, the biggest that still contributes today to to women not being in leadership is gender bias and gender stereotypes. So that's the first one.
Yeah.
The second one I would say is lack of access to informal networks would be the second.
Like mentorship and stuff like that.
No, that mentorship and sponsorship are important, but what I mean by lack of access to informal networks is I'm referring to like the old boys club. That's a type of informal network. So do you want me to explain it or come back to it after the third?
Yeah, let's just dive into it a little bit, because I get what you mean, like hanging out with the boys for a beer or whatever. Is that kind of what you mean, or?
Kind of, but even from a work perspective. So for your listeners on the line who are in their careers, these informal networks play a critical role in organizations. So, for example, it can be drinks after work. It could be going to a sporting event at a conference, or it could be taking your clients out to play golf. But it could be just groups that meet informally on their own, but not everyone's included in that. So these informal networks are important because it's a lot of them.
Oh yeah, friends are everything in business. I mean, you don't get promoted without a network.
Well, yeah. So it's about you build relationships in these informal networks, right? You learn about key business issues going on. You learn about what's going on with competition. But if you think about these relaxed settings, informal settings. So let's take golf, for example.
Sure.
So still today, men predominantly take clients out for golf, and women often aren't included in that. It's still mostly men, right? Mm-hmm. So think about this though. If you're at a golf tournament or a sporting event, mm-hmm. Even with your colleagues, a sporting event, okay, you're in a relaxed setting, mm-hmm. right? You let your guard down.
Build trust.
you probably trust and share personal information about yourself with other people. So you're having critical rapport building
Yeah.
opportunity, but you're also learning information about the company, so you're building critical. I guess you're building critical bridges and relationships. Well, and that's fantastic, and it's an important part of work. And so I think informal networks are a good thing, but the negative aspect of it is women still today are excluded from most of these informal networks. And I'll just give you one example is, so I'm a professor in Pepperdine's MBA program, and one of my female MBA students shared in class the other day that she works at a tech company, and she considers herself pretty up on things. She's well respected, people like her, she's doing a good job, and she's worked there for 2 years, and her male colleagues have had this group, and they get together once a week to just chat and share things, and she had no idea, and these are her peers.
Yeah.
Her male peers were having this subgroup for 2 years, and she knew nothing about it. And they were her peers. So that's just an example. Now, and if she was there, not only would she probably have had a great time, but she would have built quality relationships and that important networking and bonding that we need at work. And so it still happens today. So that's I would say the number 2 reason.
Yeah, I think we'll come back and definitely touch on all these. That one does bring up some stuff for me too, so I hear you. Let's go to number 3, the finances, and then we'll dive into strategies. So what was the third one?
Okay, sure. So the third one, Jared, I would say is probably what I call breadwinner caregiver issues.
Yeah.
And so if you look at, you might have an idea what I'm.
Yeah, breadwinner and caregiver. Like women are in the house raising babies and not going to work, and the men are the ones providing, and so forth, right?
Yeah, but also, let me give you an interesting statistic around this. So today, most households are two earner households. So both individuals are working. Okay, so both parents are working. If they have kids, both parents. So if a woman is the primary breadwinner, so let's say she makes more money. So let's say the woman's the primary breadwinner of her household. She's usually the primary caregiver as well. If a male is the primary breadwinner of his household, he's rarely the primary caregiver. So this sets up an important dynamic, because we can't be 100% successful at everything. So if you have the lion's share of the caregiving and the household duties, let's say cooking, doing the dishes, doing the laundry, grocery shopping, plus you're trying to manage a career, it makes it very difficult to succeed. We can't do everything 100%. And so this is still, and I have it categorized as a barrier because it's one of the contributing factors, the reason we don't see more women in leadership roles. And actually what the data shows is that men who are in leadership roles, 80% of them have spouses who stay home.
Yeah.
But if you look at women, the statistics are just the opposite. If you look at female executives, 80% of their spouses work. So they don't have the spousal support from their partner that the men have. And so this is a really important dynamic that the couple needs to discuss, because it has a significant impact on our career, trajectory.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's and it's kind of related to point number 1 too, gender bias. It's just a more specific point of it. No, that's really I'm learning some stuff right now. I didn't realize it was like 80-20 on so okay, I love it. And then the question we kind of touched upon earlier was, does it make more financial sense? Does it increase profit if there are more women in leadership? That's the question that people want to know. And the evidence behind it, right? I mean, do we have robust studies? Do we have multiple resources, bias sources, and so forth? And You're the researcher, you're the expert. Why don't we dive into that?
Well, I'm happy to say yes to all that.
Okay.
Yes, there actually is mounds of data now to show that actually the more diverse organizations are, the better they perform on a whole host of measures. More return on equity, more return on investment, better, higher revenues, more employee engagement. You have more collaboration, more innovation. So, and I refer to all this. I actually have a chapter in my book it's titled Diversify or Die. And the reason I titled it that is because there's so much data now to show that we, as a global society, we are becoming more diverse every single day.
Mhm.
And we are, and not just gender diversity, but race, religion, LGBT, disability. We have a variety of different people working side by side in the workplace now, and we're only becoming more diverse. And so companies that aren't on board with diversity and inclusion are not going to have a competitive advantage over companies that are more inclusive. And so there's a lot of data to show that the more diverse, the better, and the more inclusive, the better. But from a gender perspective, there's also a lot of data to show that when companies that have leaders and boards of directors that have more women on them, that they clearly outshine their companies that are all male. I'll have all male boards.
How does that work out in practice? I don't know. This could be just it, but like, how does that work out in practice? So men maybe make a more, I'll say, risky decision or something like that, and then the boards that have a different, a more weight to a more cautious perspective, they will manage their risk management better, or how does that actually play out?
Yeah, I see what you're asking. It actually, so there's lots of reasons why diversity is
And
good.
specifically too, in regards to women in leadership too, like let's say it's a board of 10 people or whatever, and one board has 9 guys and 1 woman, and then the other one is 5 and 5.
Yeah.
If you have a bunch of those groups, statistically speaking, on average, blah, 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 the 5 and 5, it sounds like is going to do much better financially. And what are the conversations different? Are they thinking about things differently? Are they, I don't know, treating their employees differently? Kind of what's happening right there?
Yeah. It's all of that. So if you have a group of like-minded people, it's not going to dawn on anybody to think outside the box because you're like-minded.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's the crux of the issue. So anytime you have other people with diverse perspectives and different insights, that's going to help you realize and look around and realize, hey, there might be another way about this, or there might be another approach. And that's the case with gender as well, is women and men think differently. I mean, I'll give you some examples.
Yeah.
So we're not only hardwired differently in our brains, but we're also socialized differently. And that starts at birth and carries into the workplace as adults. So we are, so you have both of those playing out, right? So you have hardwiring and you have socialization. But women, so let's take problem solving, for example, which is actually part of emotional intelligence. When it comes to problem solving, women tend to think, or let me start with men. Men tend to be very convergent in their problem solving, which means they converge on the problem. They're focused like a laser.
Yes.
And they address it head on and take care of it quickly, right? They're efficient, quick, focused.
100% me.
So men are very convergent when it comes to problem solving. And so very like a laser. Think of a laser.
Yes.
Like lasers.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Women are very different. When it comes to problem solving, women are divergent, meaning they scan the environment like a radar. Think of a radar, picking up signals from the environment. So women look around at different factors and pull in different options when they make decisions and when they solve problems. So it's not that one's right and one's wrong. And this is a really important concept. This is not about rights and wrongs. It's just about differences. But because we have differences in how we we make decisions and how we solve problems. We actually have differences in virtually every aspect of business. And this is something, this is the gender piece that I find fascinating, and that most people are not aware of, is that men and women approach virtually every aspect of business differently.
Wow.
So not only problem solving, what we just talked about, but we take risks differently.
Yeah.
Women tend to be much more calculated in their decisions.
Huh.
And then men tend to just jump in and say, let's try it.
Yeah.
We have differences in how we communicate. We have differences in how we work in teams, how we collaborate. We have differences.
Something in your book about competition too, I believe. Competition. There was something, that was another difference in there. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I can speak to that. I'll speak to that as well. But we have differences in how we work within a structure, the structure we prefer to work in an organizational structure.
Sure.
And then finally, how we lead. We even lead differently. The overall effectiveness is the same. And lots of studies have shown that men and women are equally effective leaders, but we have different styles.
Yeah.
And those styles are important to pay attention to, because there's a time and place for each. But in today's, highly competitive, fast-paced environment,
fluid and ambiguous and
exactly.
Yeah,
So,
I totally agree that the multiple perspectives and just the diversity, when you're backed into a corner and you can only see one way forward, you're just, over time, you're going to make some critical errors. And I totally get the diversity perspective, and it's so well played out. I mean, we see all the Fortune 500 companies doing diversity trainings because the research is so abundantly clear. I love it. So yeah, how do we address some of these barriers?
well, that's the $1 million question, right?
That's and how do we do it? How do we address them?
Yeah, sure. So there are the good news. Well, there's good news. There's good and bad news to every situation. But the good news here. So the bad news is there's lots of barriers.
Yeah, I was gonna say. The bad news is it's entrenched. There's a lot of barriers. There's resistance, probably. Okay, bad news is over. Let's go on to the good news.
You got it. And women have a long way to go when you look at the numbers that we talked about earlier. So right, we've barely put a dent in it, but we've made, we've had baby steps. We've made positive steps in general, but we have a long way to go. But so the positive aspect is that, yes, there are many things we can do to address all of the different barriers. And what's really important about what we can do about it is we need men on board. And actually, we will not come anywhere near gender balanced leadership or gender parity in the workplace until we have men. We need men, because men are in the vast majority of men are in decision making positions of power.
Yeah.
So we could talk all day long about women's issues and within women's groups, but it won't go anywhere without men. And so it's critically important that men and women are aware of these issues and these barriers, and that we're working together to not only dialogue, but take action against it.
Yeah. Okay, got it. So that's a huge point, working with men. And let's see. So let's say, how do you, like, so earlier, what's coming up for me right now is when we said like a guy at Google or a woman, or forget it, if it was some tech company, I forget if you said it was Google or not. But for 2 years, she was working on her job with her peers, and then 2 years go by and she realizes a bunch of guys have been hanging out.
Yeah.
And me being a guy, like, I don't know, like I was like, oh yeah, like I don't know, like do I need to include women? Like I just want to hang out with my guy friends, and like it's nothing personal. Like don't take it personal. You know what I mean? Like that kind of issue I could see being a barrier. And I'm just sharing with what comes up for me. And I can imagine, especially with point number 2 being lacking access to informal networks, where it's not, I mean, that could be a mixture of bias or, whatever, or just like wanting to, like, not malintentioned or anything, just like I'm more comfortable hanging out with my guy friends. And
Yeah.
like, I don't know, maybe being a woman, she might feel uncomfortable being the only woman there, or, I don't know. I could just see like there being a bunch of stuff coming up when we start talking about uh,
Yeah.
how to get on the same page. And I don't know, maybe there's any stories or kind of experiences that come up for you that you could share too.
I can. I actually have a great story for that question.
Sure, sure.
Uh, so, so a couple years ago, there was this um, pharmaceutical company that they had a conference in New York, a meeting. They were at a meeting. They had a meeting in New York,
Got
and
it.
so one evening they had a free evening, and so a large group of the men decided to go to Madison Square Garden and catch the game. So they take off. Well, this large group of women are left at the hotel saying, well, what are we going to do now? And so they decide to go out to dinner. So they went and had a nice dinner together. So the next morning, and this is a true story, the
Yeah.
next morning they come together, these groups, and one of the men asked the women, what did you guys do last night? And the women said, oh, we went to so and so, had a great time. And he goes, why didn't you invite us?
Oh, oh,
And she looked at him and she goes, why didn't you invite us to the game? And so
yeah,
this
yeah,
is a perfect example of when we oftentimes, you're right, it's not intentional most of the time.
yeah,
We just are simply not inclusive in our behaviors. And so,
yeah.
for example, if the men would have thought to invite the women would have had a great time at the game.
Yeah.
They would have they would have a great
It would
time.
have been more fun. It would have been more fun. The guys were just too nerdy and socially awkward, and they were like, we're gonna feel awkward if all these girls come, and let's be more. It's just more comfortable. It's just like it's easier to just hang out with the guys, I guess, or I don't know. That's what comes up for me. That might be a simplistic answer. But no, I hear you. So
Yeah.
is that the
But,
end of your story, or please keep going if there's more?
well, yeah, no, you got the gist of it. But
Yeah,
basically,
yeah.
women didn't invite the men because
And then we're at the game, and
But it's a great.
that's
It's a great.
frustrating. That must be frustrating. Like, are you kidding me? Like, you left before. You didn't invite us at all, and you left. There's no way. Yeah.
But
Um.
just that one simple example. That's one example. It's one simple
Yeah.
situation. Great example of how we simply need to be more inclusive in our behaviors, because
Yeah.
and if women who, yes, there probably were some women who wouldn't have liked to see a basketball game at Madison Square Garden. That's okay. But some women would have loved it. They would have had a great time, and you probably would have built better relationships, better work relationships, and vice versa with the dinner. So I,
Totally.
I think in general, my advice is to be, and you mentioned this, Jared, and I'm going to pick up on it, but you mentioned it's more comfortable. It's easy.
It's easy. Yeah.
What's comfortable and what's easy is because we're familiar with it. But
Yeah.
that's not always diverse. And if we allow ourselves to be open to other experiences and other perspectives, we'll be amazed at how much it's gonna. Yeah.
Rich and fun. Hanging out with guys and girls is always, in my opinion, more fun. There's just a dynamic that it's more fun. Although I can easily see just me like calling up my nerd friends and my guy friends and like just hanging out with the guys too. But yeah, I like what you said. It might be a little bit, it's easy to just hang out with the guys. So how do, in the past working with, in your consulting business and so forth, how, how do, how do you approach this? You go, let's say a company approaches you and, yeah, how do those conversations look? Kind of talking with other male CEOs. I mean, if they're reaching out to you, there's some buy-in already. They're already kind of on board, I guess, but that could be an assumption. When you work with the C-suite, how do you kind of help them see differently? How do you help them implement company policies that are more gender inclusive? And how do you start having that conversation? Especially around the informal networks too. Like, how do you ask someone? Maybe you don't ask them, but how do you get them to change who they hang out with casually? That's the tough one. I mean, we can implement stuff at work, but when people go outside of work, the informal thing, how do we start, making inclusivity a more natural and, just not even thought about choice?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple things. We need to first be aware of the issues and biases we may have. Um,
Yeah, that's
and
true.
I'll give you an example of it. And when it comes to men, and again, I'm bringing up men are critically important, and most men are in leadership positions. But when it comes to men, I find that it's the vast majority of men. It's nothing intentional.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They're not intentionally holding women back. The vast majority of men are simply unaware of these issues. So the first step is actually to bring awareness of all these different issues to the table and say, hey, did you ever think about how your behavior may not have been inclusive?
Mm.
Or did you ever think about, who are you having dinner with? Is it the same male, your same male peers, every time?
Yeah.
So part of it is the awareness part. And then the other part is being willing to disrupt our normal process and get out of our comfort zone.
Yes.
I'll give you an example of this from Google, actually, and another true story is, so Google did unconscious bias training a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so they went through this training, they put their managers through this training, and one of the managers, so Google, by the way, like most tech companies, are about 80% Asian and Caucasian male.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why the tech companies get a lot of focus when it comes to diversity. It's because they have a ways to go, and they're aware of it.
Yeah.
So Google went through this bias training, and one of they had this male team of engineers, and they had a female engineer who was interviewing for a position on their team. And one of the male managers spoke up and said, hey guys, because they'd just been through this training, he goes, hey guys, let's just keep in mind that we may not fully appreciate the qualities that this candidate brings to our team.
Interesting.
Just by saying that, it was enough to bring awareness to the team.
Yeah.
Make them think and make them just stop their normal thought and pause and think about it. And just saying that was enough, and she got hired.
Okay. Sweet.
Yeah.
Sweet. I like that story. And also too, I imagine, just since women don't have as much leadership positions, probably more, and it'll just, we notice stuff that's kind of our problems, and guys might be blinded to this just because it's not their problem, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I'm imagining that women are probably going to be the ones having to be more assertive and start these conversations, because I can imagine a guy, a CEO, C-suite, being open to the idea, being open to that conversation, but not like not starting it, or not even having it on his radar, and then like it taking the initiative of a woman to step up and talk about it. Is that your perception as well, or is it kind of more just doing podcasts and media and just a general conversation, or does it require women stepping up and kind of, hey, let's talk about this?
It requires both.
Both, yeah.
Both. So women, there's collectively, women don't have enough numbers or power, frankly, to do it by themselves. And so that's why men are critically important to the process. So yes, we do need women to asserting themselves and sharing what's really important to them and what their needs are in the workplace. But then we also need men to get on board with with actually gender parity and have that as one of their key critical organizational goals. And there are companies that have done a great job in this, but there's still a lot that have not, and they're
sure,
they haven't done enough. They may say it, there may be a tagline on their website, but there's not really teeth behind the initiatives that they've put in place. So we need both. We need both men and women working together towards and gender parity, by the way, or gender balance, whichever you prefer, has to be a key success factor or a key priority for the organization, or else it'll never happen.
Yeah, and from a bottom line perspective too. Like, I mean, I think that's important
Yes.
too yeah. So what can men do to support more women?
Yeah, it's a great question. The good news, there's lots of things men can do. I'll just give you a couple examples. So mentors and sponsors I referenced earlier. So mentors are great, and we need men providing their perspectives and their experiences, and mentoring women. And
Mm-hmm.
so we absolutely need that. But it's also critical to have men sponsor women. So the difference between mentors and sponsors is mentors help you in your current job. So they help you develop your skills, maybe your personal development, and they help you improve in your current job. So it's mentoring, right? But a sponsor helps you get to your next job. So they're the ones, this is a sponsor would, in a closed door meeting would say, hey, I think Jane is great and Jane should be promoted for these reasons. And so we need men. It's critically important for men to sponsor women, again, because men are in those positions already, but it also carries more from a perception. Talk about perception. It comes back, it carries more credibility. When men say, I think, so-and-so, Susan or Jane should be promoted because she's great. The perception is that will carry more weight, oftentimes than a female supporting another female. So those are two things men can do is mentor women, but also we need more men sponsoring women and helping them to get to the next role.
Yeah, I hear you. Let's just, as we start to kind of wind up here and stuff, if we could dive into like one behavioral strategy, like step-by-step nitty-gritty. Let's talk about, we were kind of talking about assertiveness before. Let's just, something I always like to dive in is like a real actionable step. So there's someone at work, maybe a woman or a guy, and they have something on their mind. They want to speak up, but they are feeling a little afraid. What's the like 1, 2, 3 steps that you would go through to encourage them to have the courage to move forward?
So having the courage to assert themselves.
Yeah, assertiveness training.
Yeah. Well, I think actually the big thing would be to be honest with your employer about your needs. So let's say work-life balance, for example. So our younger generations, millennials and Gen Z, even coming up behind them, put a premium on work-life balance.
Yes.
Women have valued that for decades, but now women, that's something new younger generations have in common with women. There's some other things too, but that's one key thing. So more organizations are paying attention to this, and they're putting more initiatives and more offerings in place to individuals to have, to balance their work and their life priorities. And so I think it's important for men or women to have an honest dialogue with their employer about what's important to them.
Yeah.
It could be childcare on site. It could be telecommuting, working from home.
And this kind of comes into emotional intelligence training. Being able to be open about your needs, being able to manage any anxiety that comes up before that conversation, being able to, read the right moment to speak up, and being able to speak up ultimately. Got it. I love it. So I had a few random questions. There was this a guy I heard about in the news lately, Jordan Peterson. I was wondering if you'd heard about him.
I haven't.
It's okay. I heard an interesting thing, and as far as I had known, the wage gap. So this is different from the leadership gap, and these are just a couple of random questions that I wanted to get your perspective on. But he was saying the wage gap is, traditionally put at like 21 cents, but like people, he mentioned that, this is why it came up, because he mentioned Google and Apple. He said, listen, he's like, the tech companies aren't being sexist. He says at a young age, guys get more interested in coding and women get more interested in people. And it's just natural when you have a ton more guys who are just, inclined to work on the computer for fun, that there's just more talented men to hire from. And that's why the 80% comes up. And you mentioned that being an issue. And I guess that kind of made sense to me. And I wanted to just get your thoughts on that, if that made sense to you.
Yeah, it is part of the reason that we see 80% men in tech companies. It is part of the reason. So, and there's lots of out there on focus on STEM, which I'm sure you've heard about. It's, the last few years, there's been so much effort and money put into STEM programs to help to get more women into STEM fields, frankly. Yeah. And that is true, that men outnumber women in, technology, engineering, science, and math programs. And so just getting more women in those fields is one. Got it. Yeah. But there's also part of the issue here is also the culture of the tech companies as well. So there are plenty of women out there who have STEM experience. So there's plenty of candidates, but another reason that we don't see as many women is one, gender bias I talked about, and that absolutely happens at the recruiting and at the interviewing process. And so a lot of women don't even get in the door because of that. But let's say they do get in the door and they get hired at Apple or Google or Facebook. If they do get in the door, what happens is they stick around for a couple years, 2 or 3 years, because the cultures are so masculine that they don't support women's strengths and women's, I would say women's competencies,
Sure.
And so many women love tech, but they often hate the companies that they work for because they're not supportive of, or they don't value what women bring to the table as far as their strengths and competencies and skills. And so oftentimes women will leave the tech sector too. So there's several issues going on there.
Yeah. Got it. Yeah, I hear it. So your book, how long is your book, and where can people find it, and where can people connect with you, and all that fun information?
Yeah. So Jared, thanks for asking. Yeah. So by the way, I'll hold up a picture of it. Here it is. The Power of Perception. I don't know if you can see that.
I can see it, yeah. Yep.
Leadership, Emotional Intelligence, and the Gender Divide.
Oh, that's a good cover, by the way.
Oh, you like the cover?
Yeah, it looks good. Yeah, it looks good. Yeah.
That's the gender divide, as you can see.
Yeah,
and that actually is pretty accurate to reality. That's about the numbers that we really see. It's like 99% to 1%. So
yeah, if you're listening, there's a bunch of blue people on the left and one person on the right of this big earthquake. Like, what's that called? What's that? Fault line or whatever.
Yeah, it's like a giant
it's splitting in half, and it's like the gender divide, and we get it.
Yeah. Okay. But where was I going with that? Oh yeah. So the book actually launched Tuesday, March 6th. So I'm really happy. Thank you. So I'm happy to be on your podcast today, talking about all these issues, because all these issues I actually include.
Yeah, you care about. Yeah,
I care about it. I'm passionate about it. It's based on my dissertation research, but it's also based on the book. And so the point of the book is to serve as a practical guide to educate men, women, and organizations on how to apply the tools and strategies to be more gender balanced and have more gender parity in our organizations globally. I mean, we have a long ways to go. But then again, if you look at the numbers we talked about, there's tons of data to show that it's the right thing to do. And diversity is not going away. So I think it has, a lot of things we talked about today is in there, and it's available. Actually, it's launched, so it's available in bookstores and online.
The Power of Perception. And if people were to want to reach out to you, where would a good place to be to find you?
Yeah, the best place is my website. It's drshawnandrews.com. Dr, there's no period, just Dr. And Shawn is SHAWN. Andrews, drshawnandrews.com. And so I've worked, actually in the last few months, I've worked really hard to update that. And I've included a lot of resources, free resources.
Excellent website. You do.
Oh, thank you.
Read it. Yeah. Yeah. You got some good blog articles and it's clean and neat and it's a good website. I got to say. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm, given that my background is in training, corporate training, I'm big on having resources and making sure things are practical and applicable. So there's a lot of free access to videos, articles, there's blogs, there's podcast and radio interviews.
Yep.
But then I also, I just recently created a 25-page self-assessment workbook. It's actually based on the book. It's based on each chapter in the book. And I include self-reflection questions from every chapter. So depending on what issue, you or your listeners may be struggling with on their jobs or in their careers, they could go deep in certain areas. And so it's a 25-page workbook and it's available for free on my website. So they can get there.
Nice. And before we get to our last question, Shawn, I want to honor you for your mission and your heart that you are bringing to your cause and the lives you're impacting and how you're helping men see differently and women become empowered and ultimately impact people in the workplace and make everyone more money, right? I mean, that's we're all about that. I really like your energy and the enthusiasm you bring to the table and your depth of knowledge. So I want to honor you for that.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you. That's a nice summary of everything. Nice wrap up.
And last question is for the listener, what is the number one, since this is Hack Your Emotional Intelligence podcast, what is the number one emotional intelligence hack, like a quick, actionable thing they can apply to their lives right after this podcast?
Quick EQ hack.
Yeah.
For men or women?
Yeah. For yours. Could be for yours. Or what works for you. It could be, for both genders.
I would say that probably one of the best things people can do, because self-awareness, so emotional intelligence starts with self-awareness first. Yeah. And there's the data shows that is the number one EQ quality that's lacking in leaders is their self-awareness, and in particular their empathy. And so I think one thing that people can do is, as a quick hack or quick solution, is just to turn to maybe 3 of your most trusted friends or colleagues and ask them how you're perceived. That
is highly recommended by so many different people.
Really?
Yeah, like I've read that in just so many different books, and I've done it myself too. And it's good. It is good. Okay, I love it. Yeah, I love it. That's a great way to that's a great way and simple to understand, and so go out there and ask people how you're perceived and be surprised.
And most of us don't get feedback, honestly. Most of us do not get honest feedback or enough feedback. And so we have to ask for it. But, I would say, pick maybe a friend, longtime friend, and then maybe pick 2 of your colleagues and ask them, how am I perceived? What, and ask them for their honest opinion.
Yeah, say like, I want to know if, my strengths and my weaknesses. And there's no judgment. This is actually helping me grow. And I'd really appreciate it, in particular, if you're able to point out something that I could do more effectively. That gives them kind of an opening to speak up. Well, you're a jerk. No, I'm just kidding. Shawn, I'm going to stop the recording. And